This is a Team Objection Podcast for... Oh, yeah, I went to the wrong overlay. That's weird.
Cool.
There
Cool.
we go. That's the ticket. For September 27, 2022, episode 546, the OBS update has caused me no shortage of problems, but we are here. We are live. Says Doug.
This guy.
That's right.
Right there. That guy.
Here, it's me.
Everything's delayed. See, I'm about to hold up 3 fingers. See?
I mean, a little bit of that delay was caused by yourself, but yes.
You think? Or was it?
But yes. And yes, I mean, if people have been watching the last couple of weeks, I know. That's actually not an OBS thing, believe it or not. Despite everything else that OBS has ruined, this is actually just Skype.
This is just the best part of technology is in this post-pandemic world, we've all realized the power of video chat, the power of the internet, the ability to speak with each other across the world at a near light speed instantaneously. Skype, on the other hand, says, how about a second delay in between video and audio? That might throw them.
Mm-hmm. And so, who knows? Zoom, of course, has a 40-minute cap with multiple participants, which I guess if only Dave is on is not a huge issue. It'd just be our side and him. But then if we have multiple people on, whether that's for trivia or just some other show, then that doesn't work. Discord makes you pay per month, and I can't really put it through the paces without paying for it first, which I'm not really a big fan of. Yes, sometimes Nitro has a trial, but not really a fan of that either. So instead, we're just going to stick with Skype for now and figure out something eventually. Or maybe Skype will figure out its own shit and put it back to the way it was.
That's a stupid thought, and I don't like it at all.
So anyways, this is a sports show. Remember back in the beginning, the early days of the podcast, we thought it was going to be kind of like a half sports show. Not the whole thing, because we were going to still do headlines and other stuff. But I think the idea was that it was going to be like half sports, half variety. And obviously, over the course of 545 episodes, it has changed into what it is now, which is better, to be clear. But Sean's not here, and since he's only a basketball fan, that means we can talk about some other things, but also basketball, because I think we had to lead with the biggest news, which, of course, we touched on 2 weeks ago, and I'm delighted to say that I was wrong.
Me too.
I thought that, and I said this in that episode, that perhaps trying to make a move on Sarver now was not the correct decision, because he was already suspended for the year and supposed to be away from all the team activities, but turns out that if one of your biggest stakeholders and your all-star point guard and one of your jersey sponsors and then myriad other sources put pressure, you can get your owner to kind of like sort of sell the team, which is the closest you're going to get to firing him. So yes, as Doug put it as we were starting up, ding dong, the witch is dead. I should be more excited for the fact that Robert Sarver is out, and I am a little bit, but instead I'm just kind of numb to the whole thing.
I mean, it was just such a weird timing where there was, oh my God, this giant story is coming out. November of 2021, this giant story came out. Sarver's going to sell the team. This is a real bombshell. And it comes out and we're like, yeah, Sarver's a real dick. I think I remember saying on the show, I was like, man, he's an asshole. Like, there's some really nasty stuff, but like, we kind of knew he was an asshole. And then the real report comes out, and a lot of those were A, confirmed, or B, you find out that there was a toxic workplace where people couldn't go to HR, where it felt like they had no chance, and so they had to just leave, which is just a horrible working situation. And they're like, man, yeah, this is really bad. He probably should be kicked out. And then the league goes, yeah, this is really bad. We don't stand by this. So we're suspending him. We're fining him $10 million, which is the most we can, suspending him for a year. Well, Adam, could you suspend him longer? Yeah, I could, but I'm not going to. Okay, well, could you sell him? Could you make him sell? No, I can't actually make him sell. You know, that's something that we have to do together as owners. Okay, well, should the owners go to vote? No, I don't think we're going to do that. And so then they put it all on the public after that, because then there was the whirlwind of everyone going, how awful this was and how everyone should, how awful he is and how the NBA failed and Adam Silver, man, I thought he was the right commissioner. I think he pretty much knew that that's what was going to happen afterward. So he knew. And there was always, I guess, the chance that Sarver could have pulled a Dan Snyder and been like, I don't care if my team's name is racist. I don't care if I abused people in my organization. I'm not selling. You can't make me. And he could have done that, but I think Sarver's a little bit smarter than that.
Let's debunk some things. Number one, Sarver in his statement hilariously blamed the current culture of the world as part of the reason why all the good that he had done since he took over the team in like 2004 was being outweighed by these hurtful words and a couple other things that he mentioned, which, first of all, absolute bullshit, and Robert Sarver, you should be better than that, okay? I'm not expecting a full apology from him. I think that's ridiculous if anybody was, because they don't understand who Robert Sarver is. But his statement was hilarious in that it sounded exactly like him, and someone probably should have coached him not to sound exactly like him. So don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you, okay? Like many other Suns fans, I'm ecstatic that he's gone. At the very least, like the fact that he's out the window, fine. Fuck him. Fuck everything he stood for. However, two things. One, the devil you know sometimes is not as bad as the devil you don't. We don't know who's going to buy this team. It's going to be somebody with a fuck ton of money. So I'm not saying that all those people are bad. I'm just saying that, if Elon Musk decides he wants to buy the Suns, I'm not sure we're going to be making an improvement. So we'll have to wait and see on that.
He'll put money into it.
I suppose. I mean, there won't be any more penny pinching, but then his punchable face is going to be on the sidelines, and he's worse to me than Robert Sarver in that regard.
I don't know about that. Sarver has a really punchable face.
Yeah, but his face doesn't really bother me other than what his face represents. But his face itself is whatever. Because there was a time in the very beginning when he was on the sidelines and we kind of liked that, Mark Cuban-esque, where he was he was a big fan of the sidelines for about a year and a half before his act already wore thin in the mid-2000s. We were kind of like, oh, look, he's like us, when he couldn't be less like us.
Yeah.
So there's one problem. And then two, to your point, you mentioned Sarver probably knew this would happen, or Adam Silver probably knew this would happen. And I think you're right, but I don't think this absolves the league of the fact that it was a piss poor response. And even if people were like, oh, Silver was just playing 4D chess, he knew that eventually this would lead to what would get him ousted when he couldn't do it himself. It's okay, but this is now the precedent you've set, and just like some of the awful choices the NFL was made with its suspension lengths, now there's a precedent set where it's okay, unless you have some kind of smoking gun, like we talked about 2 weeks ago with the Sterling tapes, I guess you're just going to slap people on the wrist and not actually force them out of the most prominent positions of the ownership spots that you have in your league. I don't think that's great either.
That smoking gun argument for many people, because that's what gets headlines, that what gets people riled up, and I understand that about people. I really do. You hear the tape of Donald Sterling back then and you're horrified. You're just how can a human being in today's day and age think this? But years ago when there was the video that came out of Ray Rice, horrible video, awful act of this human being, he got a very long punishment for this awful act. Rightly so, but he basically was out of the league because it was on video. However, then there's stories that I believe are verified of other players who have beaten their girlfriends, beaten their wives. There's one story of somebody on the Cowboys, I think, and I can't remember his name, unfortunately, who was basically beating his girlfriend, threw her onto a bed full of guns and said, pick one. Pick which one you want me to shoot you with. And it's that's way worse than what Ray Rice did. Yet that guy was still in the league. He had a 2-game suspension or something because there wasn't a video of it. If there was a video of that, holy crap, that would have been a media shitstorm. But there isn't. And so we are all, as a society, so we have to see it or hear it to believe it. And I wish that we would go to that length of being oh, this is a substantiated report. We know this was said. Let's treat it as the same as hearing it for real. I know it's a little bit of a pipe dream, but I think I wish I would go that direction.
I know, and the difficulty is, again, for some people, the comparison, was this guy sports betted, and he got banned for a year, and domestic violence is 4 games or 2 games or whatever the case might be. It's first of all, you're trying to make a false equivalency. Yes, if we were judging these strictly on their own merit, of course that would not be a sensible decision, but you're talking about the integrity of a sports league. Now, you could still be well, that's still not as important as domestic violence. I'm okay, fine. At this point, we're too obtuse to even have a conversation. But
yeah.
The fact remains that this now, because we only really had Sterling before, this is now a second bar that we can compare it to, even when the situations are not comparable. And then to your point, everything that Sarver ended up putting out and everything the independent investigation ended up finding essentially corroborated the reporting that was done by Baxter Holmes in this article months ago, which then includes the testimonies of a dozen or more Suns staffers who, the guy whose pants he pulled down, that apparently was confirmed. And the unwanted sexual comments around female workers, those were apparently confirmed. So it's we have all these smaller offenses that add up into a picture of some kind of awful human being in a position of power where he can flaunt that, right? So we basically just disregarded all those testimonies. All the people that were involved basically got to watch him get slapped on the wrist by the league and basically have their testimonies be called invalid in a way. Or, if not invalid, meaningless. Like, okay, you went through this experience. We're going to kind of like... That's the sound. I hope the sound's picking up. We're just going to slap him on the wrist, and then, whatever you went through, fine. But, he's going to come back in a year and resume the position that he was in before and just continue to terrorize folks. To me, that sends the wrong message.
It does, and unfortunately, it's the politicking of it, because I said it a couple weeks ago when we talked about it on the show. I am quite certain that the owners are getting a little worried. There is now a full precedent of an owner being forced to sell, and now there's a second sentiment of an owner being publicly pressured into selling after a suspension for his conduct. I just wonder how many skeletons are out there in the closet that these other owners are like, oh boy, I really hope my stuff doesn't get out, because we've already got precedent, and maybe my stuff isn't as bad as this, but it's still not great, and I don't want to sell my team, so I can't be the one to vote. I can't be the hypocrite that votes to get him out. And so now we've just got this I've got to cover my ass situation for everybody else, and that's no good.
And to a certain extent, even if they haven't done anything, I think there's at least a little bit of a concern that would also be akin to, like, what if somebody brings false accusations against me, which are overblown? The vast majority of these situations are accurate accusations, but occasionally it does come out that somebody was just trying to use this for their own gain and attack someone prominent. So even if you do have a clean slate, I'm sure there's some element of like, okay, well, all it takes is a handful of folks to band together, and then would I be targeted for something like this? Now, again, I don't really feel bad for the folks in this situation, and Lord knows they've gotten plenty of legs up based on their situation. But I think you're right in the sense that, like, yeah, once you prop that door open, it's very difficult to close it again. So for anybody who even has the smallest skeletons in their closet, it's probably a little bit like, I don't know if this is a Pandora's box we want to open.
The funny thing is about all this is when you look at the list of things that Sarver did, as far as hostile work environment, pulling pants down, making crude jokes, anything individually, I think could have been like, dude, don't do that. And one time it could have been like, okay, everything's fine. Using the racially charged language, using the N-word when saying like, hey, well, he said it. Like, I don't see the problem. And if someone explained that to him and he didn't do it again afterward, again, learning from the mistakes. There was, as it was evidenced by you mentioned earlier, with his letter, his outgoing letter, he never learned a thing. And it was just this culmination of everything. And I cannot believe that someone is that obtuse to his own self that you can't see that, hey, this offends people, this hurts people. And it's just such a narcissistic way of living. And I still think he'll go to his grave thinking like, I don't know what I did wrong. I fixed it. I did good. What's wrong?
Yeah, we donated a bunch of money to charity, and we had people out in the community, and blah, 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 blah. And you're right. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me was the letter. If there was going to be any reservations about me thinking this punishment was too severe or like maybe out of line or whatever, that was very easily, and the same day, quickly put that to ease. It was just like, nope, hasn't learned jack shit, hasn't changed at all, doesn't know how to react when someone tells him no, clearly hasn't been in that position for a long time. So, tough. See you later, Bobby.
I'm surprised he didn't use the word cancel culture. Like, he used in this culture of unforgiveness.
He alluded to it. He didn't say it in as many words, but he did, really.
Yeah. And again, it sparks people online debating like, well, this isn't cancel culture, it's consequences culture. I'm like, I get that. That makes sense. And in this case, when you have a work environment that's this awful, yeah, you probably shouldn't be there, because in any other corporation, I think out there, if a Fortune 500 company had their CEO on record doing these types of acts, the board of directors would kick them out. That would happen. It's bad press for the company. They'd kick them out. The NBA isn't exactly a publicly traded company, so it's not the exact same thing, but in a sense, it's pretty similar, and that's what happened.
Yep. And people were like, well, the consequences are he gets to sell the team for maybe $3 billion.
Not the point.
I mean, I guess, but what can you do?
Well, and I've heard people say that argument, but at this point, there is a certain point of money where it doesn't matter anymore. It matters in status only. And owning an NBA team, there's 30 teams. That's it. If you're the head of one of these 30 teams, there are 30 people in the world who have this position. That's it. So you losing this status doesn't have a dollar amount exactly for some people.
Doug says he wishes the media reacted to these things as quickly as the council reacts to the voice recording of Sarah in Mass Effect. Yeah, I mean, talk about a smoking gun. Like, you should move that quickly. Hell, it's almost amazing. Like, it took the players threatening to walk out in the Sterling situation when there was something that damning available. So I guess we've gotten at least a little bit further along than back then. So that's something. But then again, I also saw, the Suns Media Day was yesterday, and I mean, like anything, everybody overreacts to everything these days. But one of them was like, well, like DeAndre Ayton was super subdued. He has his own reasons. But then again, like everybody seemed kind of down, and I saw like, oh, they're still reeling from Game 7 against Dallas, or they're still like pissed off about this or that. And it's like, there's no winning. If they had come out like nothing happened, then it would have been like disrespectful to pretend like, oh, like Sarver's gone. We're just not gonna we're gonna pretend it didn't even happen. We're not gonna talk about it. I'm kind of tired of the whole thing. I don't know. Maybe it's just overreactions, and now I'm getting old and crotchety. But I'm like, just like, who fucking cares? Stop.
The Twitter cycle has to go through everything, because I saw people giving Devin Booker shit for his answers when he was asked about Sarver. Booker's answers was basically like, look, I didn't see any of this type of stuff. I never experienced it, but I heard about it, and I'm sorry for the people that were harmed by this. That's not okay. And, we're going to move forward, and, we'll have somebody new, and that'll be that. And people were giving him shit that he wasn't giving like more credence to it. I'm like, but that's what his experience was. He said, I didn't have this experience, but they proved that this happened. People were hurt, and I'm sorry that happened. Move on. Like, I don't know what else he should have said, but people give him shit.
And if he doesn't address it at all, and if they're laughing and joking about, it's a new season, a new opportunity, blah, 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 again, then you're being disrespectful to the victims, or just, there are certain spots you can't win. It's why, I mean, obviously I still have to be on social media given the nature of my work. Otherwise, I would have deleted my Facebook account, or at least made it private just for the photos to keep on it. And I would never have a Twitter other than to read others. So, like, I haven't posted in a long time for that very reason, because there's no winning. Again, this is the other side of that coin, too. Not only do you have to constantly walk this tightrope of navigating cancel culture on all sides, you also then have to respond to everything. If you comment on one thing, then you have to comment on everything. As soon as you've addressed one thing, then it's going to be we're going to go down the road where we were like talking about China last year, where it's like, I don't know why certain NBA players, like a LeBron, I get he's the biggest star in the league, but I don't know why we're asking NBA athletes about China. They're not equipped to answer that question. I don't really care what their answer is. But it's just one example of like, okay, I'm starting asking him about, Roe versus Wade being overturned. When I started asking him about political seasons coming up here with the election, but just, I'm not telling people to shut up and dribble. If they want to talk about stuff, great. But I don't think it should be part of the questions on Media Day.
It's their choice. It's not mandatory that you address these complex issues that you are going to have it put in a soundbite that someone is going to hate no matter what you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't even want to talk about Suns Media Day. We'll do a Suns preview as we get closer to the start of the season, and we'll obviously have Sean here for that because that's too important not to. But like the Ayton stuff, I don't care. I think the Ayton stuff, as usual, is a mirror. If the people who don't like him are going to like him less, he also cannot win, because if he comes out being jokey and fun like he usually was the last couple seasons, then again it's going to come off as like aloof or disinterested in some way. And if he comes out serious, which some people have wanted him to be more so, then it also comes off as he doesn't want to be here. Just I don't want to talk about any of it.
No. Then it's just funny how it's the overreactions, like you mentioned, because right now, and I will say, like in a group text when it's just a couple people, like it's fun to overreact because, hey, whatever, I'll overreact. It doesn't really matter in the end.
Yeah.
But when you see it on Twitter and that becomes the general consensus, it's just like, okay, this is just painful to read and it doesn't mean anything, and this is a waste of time for all of us.
Yeah, because again, he can't win with certain people. And for some people, he can do no wrong, which is also incorrect.
Mikal Bridges, he can't do wrong, though. He's the one that, like, no matter what.
I am not unhappy that he's still here.
I'm the same way. I'm just like, you know what? Man, I would have loved Kevin Durant here. I'm really glad Mikal's still here.
Yeah, and Cam Johnson, who may also have been gone in any said trades. Now, that's also not just copium. I would rather have Kevin Durant than both of them. I'll be very clear. But as a consolation prize, could be worse. There's the Jay Crowder situation. Who knows what that's going to look like, if that's going to resolve by training camp, etc. Like, I don't know. But, all of a sudden it's almost October, which means it's almost preseason, which means the season's almost starting. So, obviously the media day sort of harkens us into that, but it's still kind of a reminder of like, oh yeah, it's almost NBA time again.
So out there, I'm springing this on you. If you could pick, who would your choice of owner be? Out of what people have been rumored.
This will sound like a cop-out. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. Just someone who's not an asshole. Someone who's not going to have tight purse strings. I don't like. Overall, do I think like Mark Cuban's been good for the Mavericks? He's the easy one to go to. Like, sure, I guess. Or like Joe Lacob for the Warriors. He's the GM. But like, like anybody with like, I'd rather it just be someone I don't think about. It's kind of the same reason I'm relieved that Trump isn't president anymore. I don't like Joe Biden, but I'm relieved it's not fucking Trump anymore, so that every day isn't a news cycle unto itself. This is kind of similar, where it's like, I would rather just be somebody who like shows up sometimes, does some good in the community, like just anybody who's not Robert Sarver at this point, or worse than Robert Sarver, and I don't care.
Yeah, I can. I don't know names, but you mentioned Joe Lacob as someone who's like, who came. I mean, the Warriors spend how much money? Like, that's the kind of the thing I'm looking for, is maybe somebody who already owns a small piece of another team and gives that up to go own the Suns outright and be the face of the Suns, and then goes, all right, here's the wallet, go open, and what you need.
Yeah.
All right, you need this? Okay, go.
And when I mentioned him relative to the GM, like Bob Myers, I think gets a lot of the goodwill because of the teams he's assembled, the drafts, the draft success they've had.
For good reason.
And Joe's kind of just stayed hands off for the most part. That's what I want. Somebody who backs the people that he puts in place without being like somebody who's trying to be at the forefront, as though that privilege bought him the luxury of being like, yes, this is my team, and I'm going to do. I don't care if you do that behind the scenes. I like exert your ownership. That's fine. But I don't need you out here making personnel decisions that fuck the team. So, like, I know it's a dodge, but I truthfully don't care. And it's also one of those spots where I'm not even going to root for someone because I have no control over it whatsoever, and I don't know what it's going to look like.
The funny thing is, I feel like Sarver kind of finally got it, because he has kind of stepped out and let James Jones do what he needs to, and said, okay, we're going to spend the luxury. Like, all of the things we wished he did in 2004, he finally was, like, starting to do, and it was way too late.
Yeah,
like all the things as fans we wished he did, because we obviously didn't see the asshole. I mean, we saw the asshole, but not the people affected by him being an asshole. And all we were like, dude, can you spend money? Can you not sell draft picks? Can you be willing to dive in and actually fund a championship team? Oh, hey, cool, you're doing it. You're letting your people do their work. Great. Oh, this report is, God, you're still a horrible person.
Which I think is part of the reason for his statement. Because I'm sure to some extent he's like, well, I started doing the things people kept crying at me about for all these years. It's like, yeah, but that's not good enough.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's part of the reason behind that.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, if it was like this happened in an early stretch in 2004 and there's been no cases of it since then, it's like, okay, I get kind of where he's coming from. He was new on the job, tried to, made some mistakes. But it's like as recently as 2019, 2020, it's like you haven't learned anything at all.
So I had a handful of other sports topics I was going to bring up. I didn't tell Dave about them. I didn't make a planner because I was tired and lazy. So
I know
instead,
my sports. It's fine. We like sports.
Okay. First off, Albert Pujols hit home runs number 699 and 700 a couple days ago.
In the same game, right?
What?
Same game, right?
Yes. Yeah. Cool. The Dodgers gave up both, which was kind of funny. He did play for them for part of a season. And I thought it was interesting just because, I mean, I'm not a big baseball fan anymore. I've fallen way the hell off. But this is starting to become this idea of like, we are seeing what will not be, these are not records, obviously, we have Hank Aaron, Bonds, whatever. But like, these are numbers we're not going to see again. We have nobody under the age of 30 over 300 home runs.
Wow.
Bryce Harper's close. He's almost at 300 and he's 29. But Mike Trout's 32, which is easy to forget because it feels like he's still like 25, 26.
Well, he's been in relative obscurity because the Angels are just like god-awfully run organization.
Yeah, and then anybody else you can think of is either too old, like Miguel Cabrera is still playing, but he's retiring after the season, and he's nowhere close to 600, let alone 700, etc. Like Robinson Cano, I think, is still in the league, but nobody gives a shit. So we're not going to see 700 home runs again. We're not going to see 600 home runs again. We might not see 500 home runs again. We're not going to see 300 wins. So now I was just kind of thinking in general, like watching Pujols do that and seeing the reactions and stuff, which was super cool. He's one of the greatest players of all time, in my opinion, especially like St. Louis Albert Pujols, not this one, but the first one for the 10 years, was just an absolute tour de force. Like uncannily consistent regular season numbers every year, and they were MVP caliber for a decade.
Yep.
We're just not going to see stuff like this anymore. So first, your thoughts on that, and then a question I have afterwards.
So two things. One, about Pujols, you're right. That first stint for Pujols, my God, I still will never forget that home run he hit in the NLCS that silenced 70,000 people in Houston, which was the biggest just holy shit, he got all of that one home run that I've seen in a while. And it was just one of those like that's what makes baseball cool in a lot of ways when something like that happens. And then with like the idea that these records, these kind of benchmarks, baseball has 300 wins for an elite pitcher, 500 home runs for an elite power hitter. There's these certain benchmarks that have always been there for people, and it is odd to me that these things just aren't gonna happen anymore or aren't happening, and I don't know why so much. Because people were hitting 500 home runs before the steroid era. But for some reason, it's just like, nope, nobody's there. Nobody's doing it. I don't know if it's just the change in the game that we're not swinging for the fences anymore. It all kind of coincides with the downfall of popularity of baseball, I think.
Well, it's sort of awkward because when you start, I mean, everybody talks about like exit velo and, the angle off the bat. And so if anything, I think we're shifting towards what we've always heard about for the last 20 years or so, which is like the true outcomes, walks, homers, or strikeouts, because you put the ball in play and then it's more luck based or the defense makes a play or whatever. So in some ways, we're kind of swinging for the fences more than ever. It's just nobody's very good at it. I don't mean nobody, like, obviously like Aaron Judge is having a massive year. He's trying to set the AL record for home runs. He's been stuck on 60 for 6 days, but it's still like, that one's weird to me. The wins I get because pitchers can barely get through 5 innings anymore because the added stress on their arms, etc. So I can understand why that one's fallen off. The home run one's a little bit more peculiar to me, but it did get me thinking, like, we have all these hollowed numbers, baseball particularly because it goes back so far, but is baseball now going to become the sport where none of these old benchmarks are reached? Because you look at the NBA, like, people would say, like, well, Wilt's 100 points. I think somebody could. Do I think it's likely? No. But given the proliferation of the three-point shot, I mean, Kobe had 81. It's the closest we've ever been. Booker had 70. Yay. Whatever. But, like, I could see it. It'd be very difficult, but I could see it. Like, no one's going to get 700 home runs again unless there's some dramatic change in the rules of baseball or, like, they start doctoring the balls or something, because it's just not going to happen. And if it does, it's going to take somebody who's not in the league yet, which means we're 20, 25 years off from it happening. Whereas, if Steph Curry went nuclear some night, maybe he could get 100. It never would happen. They'd bench him in the fourth. But you know what I mean? Like, are there other numbers that are sacred that you think are unobtainable, or ones that you think will happen that people don't think of?
In baseball in particular, or any sports?
Any sports.
Well, one thing I just want to mention before I say that is just, it's interesting that I've heard people out there saying that Aaron Judge is going for the real home run record, which I think is funny because whatever.
Hey, everybody was really excited to watch McGuire and so when it happened, and to watch Barry Bonds when it happened, and then myself included too. I mean, that was what brought baseball back from the strike in '95. But now all of a sudden they're all out of the Hall of Fame, even though Bonds would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer if he had never taken steroids.
Well, so yeah.
And I hate Barry Bonds, so don't pretend like I'm being like an apologist for him, but I think it's stupid. But anyways, go ahead. I mean, the Baseball Hall of Fame we could do a whole segment on. Like, the first unanimous Hall of Famer was Mariano Rivera. And nothing against Rivera, he was awesome, but like, that's the first time the voters pulled their head out of their ass to make someone 100%. Not Randy Johnson, not Roger Clemens. Oh, steroids, right? Of course, but
not Babe Ruth,
not Pedro Martinez, not Ted Williams, not. Anyways, that's my own bugaboo. I could rant about that for a long time.
It's the Hall of Fame's in their own nature, kind of dumb in our own way. But anyway, records that aren't going to be matched in sports. I think like the 56 game hitting streak is just that's a baseball one. But Jesus, how do you do something like that?
Yeah, you're lucky if you get one to 30, which is barely halfway.
I remember Luis Gonzalez in 2000 or 2001 had a 29 game or 30 game hitting streak or something like that, and we were like, holy crap, 30 games, he's got a whole month where he's got to hit in at least a game. It's incredible. Whatever, like, it's just such a crazy record. Let's see what else is out there. I mean, for basketball stuff, I like that 100 points. Like, I get what you're saying. Oh God, I don't know if that's ever going to happen, because it would have to be a close game. That's the only way that a person could ever get to 100 points, is they have to go absolutely nuclear and the game has to be close. Because if I recall correctly, Kobe could have had more, but they were winning by a lot, and so they took him out.
I think there was only a couple minutes left, but yeah, because they were up like 13 or 14 down the stretch.
There was Klay Thompson. I think they took him out with 61 in the third quarter. Now, he wasn't going to get 39 points in the fourth quarter, but I mean, he's done it before, so I guess it's possible.
But that's the thing where like you can at least conceive of a universe. Like I don't know what universe we'd have to live in for someone to get to 300 wins again.
Yeah. No, that one's true because the way they treat pitchers, I mean, they're taking pitchers out with no hitters going in the 8th inning. It's like, but there's a no hitter going. Like, I understand that a win is a win, and ultimately it doesn't really matter if you get a no hitter or not, but it's a no hitter. Like, it's kind of important, I think.
Yeah. I'm sure you could argue like some of Wilt's stuff, you know,
I mean,
averaging like 20 something rebounds in a season per game and like
never fouling out.
yeah, besides his 100-pointer, there are plenty of other sports records but it was just something I was thinking about where I was like, that's interesting to think that like I'm not going to see this again. Like I'll die before this happens again.
Gretzky's records are like some of the most untouchable things. Like I think we've talked about before on a show where I'm like, if you played fantasy hockey in the 80s, you had to split Wayne Gretzky into 2 players because he was that dominant.
Yeah, imagine like fighting over the number 1 pick. You're like, I know who it is. Every year I know who it is. I also got to thinking about like certain ones obviously that we don't think are possible will be because again, they put in a 4-point line or in the NBA or like something happens that we can't account for. To me, the other weird one, and this is a segue, as convenient, is I think we would have thought that Pete Sampras's record of all-time Grand Slams in tennis was going to be maybe not untouchable, but not reached for a long time. He ended up with 14, which was the most by 2, and no one else had really ever been that close to him. Agassi retired with 8, and there was a handful of other players behind Sampras with like 10, 11, 12. We just watched the first of the big 3 that all surpassed Sampras by leaps and bounds retire. That was Roger Federer, who had his last match last week in a doubles pairing with, interestingly enough, Rafael Nadal. Did you see anything about that? What were your thoughts on Federer retiring? And I'll ask you a leading question. For me, it kind of hit differently because that's somebody that, you know, kind of like when LeBron retires, that I watched from start to finish. An icon of the sport. So like Jordan, you know, he was playing when I was 2, 1. So like I watched him, but I didn't watch his whole career from start to finish. But LeBron or Federer or Djokovic or Nadal, does this feel weird now that we're seeing for the first time at our age, like the people that started now finishing, or was it like Tim Duncan or somebody else that did that for you?
I remember people I looked up to when I was a kid, Grant Hill, being like, oh man, Grant Hill's old. I remember like as a kid seeing like this new up and comer Grant Hill or Jason Kidd or somebody like that. Like I remember them, you know, like, man, these are the stars of the upcoming stars of the 90s when I was a kid really into basketball. So that was kind of like the first time I was like, whew, this is getting weird. I mean, it's just a sign we're getting old. But what's funny when you like combining the records thing and this end of an era thing is I feel like there weren't as many elite people at a certain thing because of training, because of the focus. It was like back a long time ago, it's kind of like, hey, I'm really good at this and I'm going to work at it and get better. Now it's kind of like people have certain physical attributes and then they focus their entire lives around it. So there's more talent spread out, so it's harder to stand out from an individual level anymore. I mean, you look at something like golf, for example. Tiger Woods came on the scene with strength training, with focus on the courses, with studying. Like he was the type that revolutionized golf because he took it with such a level of focus from a young age. Nowadays, most golfers have that type of thing. They have their strength training, they have their focus on the course, they have their caddies, they know the strategic percentages, statistical arguments for why to take a shot, when to take a shot. That didn't exist when John Daly was drinking 4 beers on the course during a PGA Tour. I mean, like that type of stuff just doesn't exist the way it used to. So it's really hard to be that standout person anymore because there's just so much other talent around there.
Yeah, or like we joked about, like, you know, well, he played against plumbers and like construction workers, but to a certain extent, yeah. Think about the talent disparity. Then think about the fact that like baseball players were still smoking on the field in like the 50s. Forget doing things that are healthy for them. They're doing things that are actively bad for them at the highest professional level. So I think you're right to a certain extent. It's also interesting because, you know, Tiger stood out because he was leaps and bounds ahead. Like Jordan, to a certain extent, is similar for me. Whereas athleticism was sort of unreal for the 80s, you know? I look at this and I'm like, forget how good Federer was and the fact that he might be the greatest of all time. How stupid is it that the 3 of them have a combined 63 Grand Slams and they all played in the same era?
It was one of the 3 of them every single time. It was kind of nuts. It was like, well, I know who's going to be there.
Should Roger Federer have been like a 30-time Grand Slam champion? Because I'm not going to give him all the ones Djokovic and Nadal won, especially Nadal's French Opens, because Nadal has as many French Opens as Sampras did total majors. But like he would have won a few more if those two weren't playing, and the same is true for any of the three, where it's like they could have obliterated Sampras's Grand Slam record, and instead they're all kind of huddled around each other, and now Federer's done, and he's already in third, and he's got Djokovic 1 ahead of him, Nadal 2 ahead of him, and they're still going. It's just weird to think about because, like, even with like you said, Tiger was the standard, and like David Duval was briefly the world number 1 and won a couple of majors. I look at like Andy Murray, who had the misfortune of playing in the era of these three titans. He still eked out 3 Grand Slams, which is pretty good when they won like 90% of them. It's just, man, what a dominant era, and we're not too far off from it ending. Like Djokovic isn't quite as old, but Nadal's running out of time too.
Oh, and we had the ending too with Serena Williams. I mean, Venus. Serena. Sorry. Yeah, Serena. I mean, that's an end of it. I mean, she's, I believe, the Grand Slam record holder as well for the women's side. And man, the idea of seeing someone like her again coming through and just being that dominant is, I don't know. But then again, we see other sports, someone like Simone Biles coming in gymnastics. Now, they have a short lifespan as far as their athletic competition, but she is the most dominant gymnast in the world right now. And that's, we have those levels of dominance that just come along in a generation sometimes.
Michael Phelps, since you think of the Olympic one, another person recently who, like Ryan Lochte was a very good American swimmer, but he wasn't Michael Phelps.
Michael Phelps was bred to be a swimmer.
There's some like 10-year-old out there right now who's going to become that athlete in some sport that we don't even know about yet, and they're going to like shock the world with what they can do. So obviously, I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment, but when something like this happens, like something like Federer retiring, I was like, man, that means something.
There's a story. I'm involved with the world of marathon running because Courtney is training for the New York Marathon now, which is kind of crazy to imagine. Like, my wife is going to run 26 miles in New York City. I'm not, because nope, I'm not doing that.
No thanks.
But a guy named Kipchoge, Eliud Kipchoge, just broke his own world record in the marathon. 26.2 miles in 2 hours, 1 minute, and 9 seconds. That is about 13 miles per hour the whole time, approximately 13 miles an hour for 2 hours straight. I'm not sure I can actually hit 13 miles an hour on dead sprint right now in my life. Not sure. Maybe I could, but for 2 hours straight is mind-blowing how humanity is in some ways.
Yeah. How interesting that we can continue to push these limits and go beyond what anybody would expect reasonably, right? Like,
yeah.
And it's going to continue in the future. That's the scariest part. Like, imagine like the first triple in figure skating.
Yeah.
Huge deal at the time. Now everybody does them. They're like commonplace in routines. Like, any little example like that, since we got an Olympics kick, I kind of thought of it, but there's going to be things that we didn't think were possible, probably different records. I think some of these more long-term ones might be difficult, but there may be other ones that we wouldn't have even considered that get threatened now because just people keep improving and we keep pushing further beyond, and we're going to become part robots, and who knows?
I love the Steve Kerr quote was the best, where it's like, well, clearly the athletes of the past were better because clearly we know nowadays as we progress as a species, humans get slower, dumber, less athletic. So clearly that's how everything, the past was clearly better.
Yeah. That's why, I mean, I don't really care for the argument about like, mid-90s Bulls versus late 2010 Warriors, but like the Warriors would smoke them. Like, I'm sorry. I don't really like that Bulls team, and I'd probably root for them in that hypothetical game, but like they don't have an answer for people shooting threes 35 feet from the basket and how that stretches the defense out. They don't have an answer for that, and they can't shoot threes themselves.
Pippen was a great defender, but he didn't have Kevin Durant, who can shoot from anywhere and is 7'1".
Yeah, like, Rodman will lock Durant down. I'm like, nobody locks Durant down. First of all, if I had to pick somebody from all time, Rodman would be high up on that list. Mm-hmm. But like, there's still 3 other massive problems on that team, and like Jordan and Pippen on offense. But then what? You think Tony Kukoc is going to swing the game against the Warriors? Who could get played off the fucking floor?
Yeah. Luke Longley, right.
Yeah, won't even see game time unless they're playing Bogut on the Warriors, which no.
Yeah. That death lineup would just run them off the court.
Yeah. And then the last thing was going to be a quick one, but we did talk about it last year, and even Sean got to chime in on it a bit, but it's the Pro Bowl being jettisoned into space
Bye.
A long overdue change of not taking fake football seriously and finally doing what I think people would kind of prefer to see, which is a flag football game.
Yeah.
That could be fun. It's different because, what ends up happening at the Pro Bowl, or happened because it's dead now, was, not much contact. Nobody wants to get hurt. Nobody wants to try super hard. I'm not saying they're going to go balls to the wall for flag football, but it's an interesting, different twist. So now I'm kind of intrigued, at least for the first year of it, because I kind of want to see them play a game that I've played poorly, but be like, oh, look, I had to reach for the flag. I'm like, oh, that's it. So I'm interested, and I don't like the NFL, and I don't care about the Pro Bowl, but I'm at least a little bit like, okay, this is a good idea.
If you can do some of the skills competitions properly, it could be really intriguing. Like, maybe I'm simplistic, but who can throw the ball the farthest sounds kind of fucking awesome, doesn't it? Hey, Aaron Rodgers, can you throw it an entire football field? Let's find out. Like, that sounds kind of fun, doesn't it? Farthest ball thrown. I don't know. Like, sometimes the challenges that they do aren't the best. Like, there's an accuracy challenge. They did a skills competition before, and there's like an accuracy challenge. And it's like, all right, fine, whatever. You can throw it, hit a target far away. That's cool. Not fun to watch. But yeah, the main event always has to be the actual, or at least a semblance of the actual game. And the fact that you've got flag football now, it could be fun to watch. I think at least it's not going to be offensive linemen just standing here doing this for a few seconds while they throw a ball, or, it's a bastardization of the sport even more so than the NBA All-Star game was.
Yeah, because at least that still resembles it, and in the fourth quarter they try. So
Mm-hmm.
at the end, you still get the result of the best players in the world playing against each other and trying. You're
Yeah.
never going to get that in the Pro Bowl. And again, I understand it given the physical component, but because I'm never going to get that, you might as well just go far afield and do something different that will still spotlight your athletes in an interesting way. So for me, it's like it's not really that much of it's a no-brainer. I'm like, yeah, let's give it a shot because whatever that was, I wasn't interested in.
The hard part was, I mean, people are so nostalgic for back in the day of seeing Pete Rose smashing into the catcher in the All-Star game. Man, he cared about the All-Star game. Yeah, I guess. But if Pete Rose had, I have the option of smashing this catcher in a meaningless game that's going to help my image and maybe make me more popular after my career, or I have a $30 million contract next year that I could lose if I'll just take it easy. I'll take the $30 million next year for not trying in this game. I get it. People want the purity, but I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah. I understand the want, and I understand them not being able to deliver. So
yeah,
it's tough to reconcile. So at a certain point, you can either keep wanting something you're not going to get, or you can move on. And the league has now, so okay.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm fine with it. I can't remember the last time I actually watched a Pro Bowl. I remember a couple friends of mine went to the Pro Bowl when it was here. Last time the Super Bowl was hosted here, I think in 2015, I think it was. And they were like, yeah, it was kind of fun. And I'm like, that's the best endorsement you have for the NFL All-Star Game. Cool. Like, nothing about it is entertaining. No one cares about it. Who wins? Who cares?
Yeah. And I'll be clear, I'm not going to sit down and watch the thing from start to finish now because of this. Like, the hell with that. But I might check out the highlights on YouTube, and that's a step further than I would have gone before.
It's a true story. I'm interested in some of the skills competition stuff because I do kind of I like seeing athletes being phenomenal athletes where you're just like, wow, he can do that. It's fun to watch when you kind of go to those extremes. Part of the reason watching the Olympics is fun, seeing Usain Bolt running that fast. It's just like, how does human beings do that? So I think it could be fun.
Well, I used to play NFL Quarterback Club on the Game Boy.
Oh yeah.
So I enjoyed the long throw, which was just mashing and the hit the targets in certain spots and whatever. So I could be on board. I could be on board as much as I'm gonna be because I don't care about football. But hey, as a non-fan, bravo. And I'm sure plenty of NFL fans are also like, yeah, because this was a bastardization of the sport we love. So why bother?
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm being an Arizona fan of someone who kind of likes football, and I've got these Arizona sports teams to root for. I really don't like football right now much either. So there we go.
Yeah, whether it's college or pro, not a lot to love right now.
Nothing to love right now. So whatever, I don't care. When's basketball season?
All right, that's our tour de sports.
We did it. We touched on baseball, hockey, golf. We didn't touch on soccer. That was it. That's all I missed.
You know what I'm sort of developing an interest for? Cricket.
I wanted to learn the rules so bad. I don't know them.
I would recommend that you or anybody else, like John Boy, the guy who does like some of the baseball breakdowns, also does cricket ones. Okay. And now, as niche of a YouTube hole as this is to go down, they've been doing these things in their warehouse. First, it was blitzball, which is kind of like wiffle ball but different.
Oh, I thought it was Final Fantasy X.
No, and now they're doing this like cricket blitzball hybrid called the Ball and Play League. It's mostly the cricket rules, so it's a good way to kind of get access to it because it's just about like, you know, how many bowlers you have and how many outs and legs and blah blah blah. But it's kind of interesting. It's an entertaining watch, and it's a good way to dip your toes into the cricket atmosphere because all of a sudden you're like, wow, unlike baseball where there's like a ball put in play once an inning, everything like you're incentivized to swing in this, and now it's all about defense and preventing the ball from hitting the wall and blah blah blah. So like cricket's everything I think I want baseball to be, but it's not, and I haven't been a fan of it for 20 years. So I'm kind of trying to decide if I want to take the plunge. The answer is probably not. I don't have the time, but every time I see clips, I'm like, oh, that looks fun.
The hardest part, honestly, is I need a rooting interest.
Yeah.
Like part of the reason I care about basketball so much is I have such a hard rooting interest. Football, I've had a hard rooting interest. Hockey, as a child, I never had a hard rooting interest. Baseball, same deal. I didn't have anybody to root for. I hear people talk about picking a Premier League team as their favorite. I'm like, how can you really get into it? Like, I guess you pick one and just root for it, but like, I don't know how to pick one. What if I'm not worried about picking wrong because there isn't a wrong answer, but like, why am I arbitrarily going to pick somebody? So cricket, I'm going to go pick a team over in Pakistan where, okay, I guess maybe I'll try to learn some players. Maybe.
Yeah, and then maybe like, you know, when the world comes together, whether it's their version of the World Cup or, you know, some kind of like Olympic style event, maybe then because you can root for countries. Because I can do that in the Olympics too. There's certain like I'm going to root against Russia every time, or I'm going to do this and that. Like, you know, USA, who's not going to do well in cricket. But you know, in general, I can be like, okay, like I like this team. Like, oh, Brazil really showed out. I really like their players. What like that's at least closer. But yeah, I don't know like which league did start with, what team, what players. I'm sure there are primers out there for people who want to. That's probably too much for me to get into. But I like the idea of it. So as a filthy American pig dog, I at the very least am like, man, cricket looks cool, and soccer at its best is also cool, and I'm less and less interested in baseball.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Baseball. It's still fun to go to a game. I think it's still fun to go and enjoy the sport in person. But part of the enjoyment is the fact of when you go with people and you're like, hey, I don't really have to watch this. That's kind of nice. Hey, look, someone hit a ball.
Yeah. Wow. And playoff baseball is still really interesting. I'll still tune into a random playoff game sometimes just because then the tension of every pitch matters. But when it's game 57 of 162 and people will be like, well, that's the same in the NBA and the NHL. It's like, I guess, but I like those two sports more. So I'm willing to forgive the fact that the intensity isn't quite there for the first 3 quarters or 2 periods because I like the sport. If it's baseball and I'm not a big fan to begin with, then that's not tension building on every pitch. That's apathy.
Yeah, and it's just too hard. Who's got time for 162 games? And maybe that's just the note on the society and the world we live in today. But Jesus, every day for 4 months straight, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I can't do it.
Yeah, and I watch almost every Suns game.
Yeah,
unless I'm double booked, I usually at least have it on in the background when I'm working or on the side or something, you know, keeping tabs on the score. And that's still half that number, but it still makes a difference because it's not almost every single day.
Yeah. And it's spaced out a little bit more, but yeah, every day I can't follow a baseball team every single day, and I can't be like, well, this guy did this, and wow, this or what's his name, Garland, no, Zach Gallen, who was our good pitcher this year, I think.
Yeah.
See, this is the hard part too. I can't even think of the damn good players.
That's right. He was threatening the longest streak of not giving up a run in baseball history. He still came up like 15 innings short, but. That was one win for the Diamondbacks and Arizona sports, but there are no winners in Arizona sports. So
Ever. Nope. Arizona sports hell. That's where we are.
The Suns. This is going to be really interesting to see where we pick them to finish this year. I can't wait for the preview. We don't know everything yet, so it's impossible to start trying. But man, we could pick them to win 60. We could pick them to win 45, and I'd be like, yeah, those are reasonable.
When we trade Jay Crowder for Zion Williamson and Steph Curry together, then we'll be just fine.
Okay, that should help.
Yeah, that'll help.
All right, that's it for the episode. Thank you for enduring our sports. We don't do it a ton, but I figured there were some interesting ones this week, and I thought, what the hell? It's timely, it's interesting. No Sean, why not? So in between shows, you can find us at our website, objectionnetwork.com or youtube.com/objectionnetwork. The Ace Attorney playthrough is finishing this week. The final video is Friday. So if you've been following along, check back in. If you haven't, the ending's pretty good, so it might still be worth checking out. After that, we're going to be picking the best songs from Pokemon, and then I'm subjecting Michaela to a Nuzlocke run, which is where if your Pokemon faints, it dies. So some interesting stuff coming up. Check it out on the YouTube page. Thanks for watching or listening. We'll see you next week.